Hi VC, Dave back with you. Okay, you'll probably be glad to know that this is going to consist entirely of vinyl finds. But those of you who watched my last video, you'll know that it cut off suddenly. The battery on my phone, or rather, not the battery, but rather the kind of memory on the phone itself was just reached its maximum. So unfortunately the video cut off at that point. Yeah, so as I said, it's going to be entirely vinyl finds that I'm going to show. I have a lot of CD and cassette finds as well, some really interesting stuff, which I'm going to do a separate video on, so I'm going to focus entirely on recent vinyl finds. I was showing this just as the last video cut off. I think I'd pretty much gone into a good bit of detail on it. The Pogues, If I Should Fall From Grace With God. This is one of 3 records which I picked up in a cash converter shop. And cash converters they're a chain of kind of, I suppose you could best describe them as pawn shops. They're found in the UK as well as here in Ireland. Yeah, so all 3 of these cost me €5. Next one up is a rather interesting one. Now, this is by a band called Emperor of Ice Cream. Now, I don't think too many of you will be familiar with them. They were a band from here in Cork, where I live. They were around in the mid-90s. They only put out about 3 or 4 EPs, this being the first of them, and this is called Overflow. This came out in 1993. Yeah, this is, even here you don't tend to see this around. It's kind of rare enough. I've only ever seen 1 copy of this in the wild previously, and that was it was a guy in a record seller here in town who's always very expensive. So anyway, I picked this up for a £5. Yeah, this is I don't know if I'd quite call this shoegaze, but it's kind of mid-90s alternative rock. Yeah, I suppose kind of verging on shoegaze, I suppose, but some of this band, once they split up, some members of this band formed a group called Bass Odyssey, who are much more electronic and kind of more in the vein of Massive Attack. They had some commercial success from what I remember, but yeah, this group they never released an album, I think. They've just released a few 12 inches. And this being the first one, which came out in 1993, so that's Emperors of Ice Cream. Just bear with me. And the final of those 3 records which I picked up also has a Cork flavour. Sean O Riada, Misha Era. Sean O Riada, a composer from here in Cork. Misha Era being one of his most famous pieces, which he composed for a documentary film of the same name, which came out in the 50s. This is a 1987 recording conducted by Elmer Bernstein. Elmer Bernstein did a lot of movie soundtracks. Also did some of Sean Riada's other pieces, like Saoirse, which was the theme tune from another documentary. So yeah, I really like always pick up Sean Riada's stuff when I see it on the wild. It was released on an Irish label called Gael Lynn. So Yeah, so that was the that's those three finds from the cash converters pawn shop type place. Moving on, this was a recent charity shop find which I picked up for the princely sum of 50 cents. This was, as it turns out, this is only the third release to be made on Apple Records. This is by Jackie Lomax, and this is actually, which one's the A side? The Eagle Laughs at You, and the A side is yeah, Sour Milk Sea. I've cleaned it up a bit. There's a few marks in it, but it plays perfectly. Has a very kind of Beatles-y, well, as you'd expect from Apple, early Apple. It does have quite a Beatles-ish feel, and in fact it was produced by George Michael. He possibly plays guitar on this as well. I'm not 100% sure. It would have originally come in a black Beatles, black Apple custom sleeve, but it's in this ordinary old tatty white sleeve. So that was a nice pickup for 50 cents. Okay, as you all know, Saturday was Record Store Day. I ventured into a local independent record store here in town. As it turned out, they weren't actually participating in Record Store Day. They've only recently reopened, and the owner was explaining to me that last year they found it quite hard. A lot of the stuff they brought in took a long time to sell, and they're only trying to re-establish themselves again after reopening recently. So they're taking a break from it this year. So I didn't make any RSD purchases but I did buy this recent release. This is another record with a Irish connection. There's a rather interesting story behind this, I'll tell you in a minute. This is called Quare Groove Volume 1. Now, for those of you who might be thinking, what does that mean? Quare, the word quare, which is an Irish variation on queer. Queer in the old-fashioned sense. It means unusual, odd. It's an expression you don't really hear often anymore. My dad still uses it from time to time, as in, oh, that's a queer thing over there, or whatever. Anyway, its title is used in a kind of kind of ironic, kind of playful sense. This is a compilation, a double compilation album, featuring a collection of Irish groove, punk, funk, and electro. And basically, it's a compilation that spans tracks dating from about late 70s into the mid 80s. Basically, Ireland wasn't noted for its kind of contribution to, say, disco or funk, but the curators of this compilation have dug up some rather obscure entries in that genre from this country. Some groups that I'd never heard of previously, and most of them only like released one or two records. It also then, as it goes into the 80s, it delves into the kind of funk influence side of post-punk. There's a band called Micro Disney, who are also from here in Cork. There's one track from them, which has a great track, which has a real kind of Gang of Four kind of a feel. Also Barry Warner, who was from Ben Costello's hometown of Limerick, who was one of the first kind of electro musicians really to emerge from this country. Also a guy called Stano. whose debut album, I have his debut album. Yeah, it has a kind of completely unpronounceable title, but very rare and very hard to find. But there is one track, kind of very kind of Cabaret Voltaire kind of influence, or you know, kind of Cabaret Voltaire's kind of later kind of electronic influenced stuff. Now, one of the weirder things about this, some of you might remember a guy called the Magpie, who I sometimes kind of had kind of a run-in with in the past, but Magpie actually put out this record. He compiled this compilation with another guy, and so a Magpie, I mean, I might have had my issues with him, but I have to give him credit where credit is due for tracking down a lot of these obscure tracks and putting this record together. And the pressing actually is absolutely superb pressing. The sound in it is great, and it's just a fantastic compilation of obscure and mostly obscure and kind of Irish funk and electro and kind of punk funk as it says on the cover. So it's a new release, came out only last month, and it's on a label called All City Records. So there we go. Okay, moving on. Yeah, I finish up with two very interesting charity shop finds which I made the other day. This one, when I spotted this, I recognised the cover. I've seen it before. Africa Addio by Riz Ortolani, and this is a soundtrack to a documentary. Well, I suppose you could call it a documentary, but I'll go into that. A documentary which came out in 1966 called Africa Addio. Now, I haven't actually seen this documentary, but it was part of a kind of sub-genre of Italian kind of exploitation movies called Mondo. I think Mondo Cane was the first one, and that's the one that gave this genre its name. So they're basically these kind of exploitative documentaries which are usually filmed in kind of third world countries and using kind of a lot of time using staged footage and passing it off as real, you know, footage of supposedly people being attacked by wild animals and that sort of thing. But anyway, this is the soundtrack to this 1966 movie. Riz Ortolani, Italian composer, he's probably best known for composing the soundtrack to a notorious 1979 movie called Cannibal Holocaust, which is highly controversial and banned in many countries. So this came out on United Artists. How to describe this? For one thing, it doesn't sound very African. Very much kind of well, there is some use of percussion, but it kind of yeah, it's kind of loungy, kind of verging on maybe on easy listening, but that kind of loungy, kind of easy listening. Yeah, quite an interesting listen actually. There's a lot of use of strings, and and I love that cover, by the way. Fantastic cover. It cost me €3 in a charity shop or stroke thrift shop, which I suppose people in America would I don't know, or Goodwill or whatever. At the same time, in that same shop, I also picked up, this is also kind of exploitation movie soundtrack related. This is The Spirit of Vampyros, Lesbos. Now, Vampyros Lesbos, actually another movie I haven't seen, but it's one I've heard of quite a lot down the years. movie from the early 70s directed by a guy called Jess Franco, who was a Spanish movie director who just churned out in numerous of these kind of B movies. So this is not actually the original soundtrack to that movie, but it is a kind of a remix. So very interesting inner sleeves as well. I'll just show you there as well. Yeah, so it's a remix of the original soundtrack, which came out in 1997 by contemporary kind of down-tempo hip-hop electro artists. The best known one is okay, there's actually somebody at the door there. Sorry, I think I know who it is, but yeah, that's yeah. I'm actually gonna have to finish it there. Sorry, I'll talk to you next time.